In the previous sequence, we saw that ADHD is a developmental disorder that interferes with the functioning of the person in different areas of his or her life, such as personal life, family, school, or work. My name is Stefan Elias. I'm a professor of child and adolescent psychiatry at the University of Geneva School of Medicine. I'm also the director of Fondation Pôle Autisme, and in this setting I see many children or adults with ADHD and complex neurodevelopmental disorders. If we take a closer look at the criteria that define ADHD, we see that it is composed of two main areas or domains. The first area is inattention, which will be expressed in terms of the person's behavior and by distractibility and lack of perseverance. Distractibility will be expressed, for example, by a form of tiredness, difficulty sustaining attention, and finally, the fact of being rather disorganized. Of course, all this is due to the person's attentional difficulty. It is not a form of opposition or challenge in front of a given situation. Formally, researchers and experts in the field have defined that, in order to speak of inattention, there must be at least 6 or more symptoms that have persisted for at least 6 months. These symptoms have a negative impact on social, academic, and professional activities in adolescents or adults. In older adolescents or adults, it is estimated that at least 5 symptoms are required to qualify for inattention. Let's now review these symptoms or criteria of inattention. So the first symptom is that the person fails to pay attention to details. They will make careless mistakes in their school, work, or even other activities. The second criterion is that the person often has difficulty sustaining attention, whether at work or even in play activity. They will lose track of conversation. He or she will get lost in reading a text, for example. The next criterion is that the person often seems not to be listening, even when spoken to directly. One has the impression that he or she is daydreaming. Often the person will not respond to instruction or will not follow through on task or assignments. They start a task, but they get somehow lost along the way. He or she has difficulty organizing himself or herself in tasks or activities. He may have difficulties managing a task that requires successive steps, or she may have trouble keeping her things neat and tidy. Her work is often described as messy, untidy. They have difficulty meeting deadlines. The person often loses things that are needed for work or activities. He or she loses things, pencil, book, tools, school documents, glasses, phone, or even keys. She may become distracted by things that happen around her. A child will look out the window. A teenager or an adult will let himself be disturbed by unrelated thoughts, which are often called distracting or sidetracking thoughts. Finally, the person with attention deficit frequently forgets things. They will forget to run errands, call a friend, back on the phone, pay a bill. They will forget their afternoon appointment. We have seen what inattention is. The second major dimension, since we're talking about attention deficit with or without hyperactivity, is the dimension of hyperactivity and impulsivity. When we talk about hyperactivity, we are talking about excessive motor activity, such as a child who runs around, who is restless, who seems mounted on springs, who taps in the fingers, or who talks non-stop. In adults, the manifestation of hyperactivity are different. For example, it can be an activity and extreme agitation, often tiring for others, someone who is constantly in action. Impulsivity, on the other hand, is defined as rushing, acting too quickly without taking the time to think about the possible consequences. Impulsivity can be motivated by a desire for immediate response or an inability to wait for gratification or reward. One manifestation of impulsivity may be forcing one's presence, interrupting play with other children, interrupting a conversation, or agreeing to a commitment without even thinking about the possible consequences. In order to be considered to have the dimension of hyperactivity and impulsivity covered, at least 6 or more of the following symptoms must be present for at least 6 months. Again, for adults 17 years of age or older, only 5 symptoms are required. Typically, this is a person who fidgets, squirms, moves around a lot in his seat, a person who stands up a lot, even though he or she is supposed to be sitting down, like in a classroom or at work. A person who runs, climbs on things, even if it is inappropriate. A person who is unable to sit still in games, leisure activities. The person is like being on spring, constantly on the go. A person who may be perceived as impatient or really hard to follow. A person who talks too much, always blurting out answers or answering a question before it's even fully asked. Difficulty waiting your turn, for example, in a lineup or a game, constantly interrupting others or intruding on a game, activity, or conversation. Sometimes in adolescents and adults, this manifests itself as a form of impulsiveness in the activity of others. For the disorder to be considered complete, these symptoms must have occurred before the age of 12, and they must be present in several contexts, such as at home, at school, at work, with friends, or outside in leisure activities. All these symptoms ultimately have an impact and will reduce the quality of social, professional, and academic life of the person concerned. So to conclude, in this video devoted to the diagnostic criteria, we have seen that ADHD is defined by 2 major symptomatic areas: attention deficit on the one hand, impulsivity and hyperactivity on the other hand. A certain number of symptoms must be present in each of these domains in order to truly qualify the diagnosis. These symptoms must have occurred before the age of 12 in order to be able to formally speak of ADHD. And all of these symptoms must have a functional impact on everyday life in various private, social, professional domains. The definition of the diagnosis has gone through a number of stages in the understanding of ADHD over the past 60 years. In the next video, we will look together at the evolution of the medical history of the ADHD diagnosis, but also the social view that people have had of ADHD over the last decades.